admit that there are people who do want to kill Americans.
Yeah, some of them are called the police.
And there's a certain level of fear that you know, that the system needs to keep inside of people to keep them participating in a certain type of way. So when people get too nervous, they gotta offload it in some way. So that's what the entertainment experience is about in a lot of instances. The consumerism experience is about.
Remember the artist once known as Mos Def? He had disappeared from American soil, living under a different name in a country that would eventually ban him for 5 years.
One thing I will say about it is that the government of South Africa, in their constitution, has it clearly written that no one, that means no one, is excluded, is prohibited from leaving the country.
Hollywood hadn't just blacklisted him. They'd watched as immigration authorities on 2 continents turned him into a man without a country.
But the bottom line is that I was no threat, and I feel that I was made or they tried to make me a public example to discourage people from entering South Africa.
By 2016, Yasiin Bey stood in a South African jail cell, arrested for trying to leave using a passport most people had never heard of, facing deportation from the only place that would still let him perform. So let's get into it. The border official at Cape Town International Airport stared at the document in his hands. January 2016, and Yasiin Bey was trying to leave South Africa after 3 years of living there with his family. The passport he'd presented wasn't American. It wasn't South African. It was a world passport, issued by an organization called the World Service Authority. The official had never seen one before. He called his supervisor. The supervisor called security. Within 20 minutes, Bey was under arrest.
The Brooklyn-born rapper, once known as Mos Def, now known as Yasiin Bey, was arrested for a fake passport in Africa on Thursday, January 14th.
The charges were serious: using fraudulent travel documents, attempting to deceive immigration authorities, violating the conditions of his stay in South Africa. Officers escorted him away from the terminal while his family watched. The artist, who'd moved to Cape Town seeking freedom from American industry control, was now facing South African criminal charges. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, least of all Bey himself. South African Home Affairs released a statement within hours. The world passport wasn't recognized as legitimate travel documentation. Bey had entered the country on a visitor's permit that had long since expired. His family had overstayed by months, possibly years. Officials were investigating whether to charge him with immigration fraud on top of the document charges. The media descended immediately, turning the airport detention into international news.
But the bottom line is that I was no threat, and I feel that I was made or they tried to make me a public example to discourage people from entering South Africa.
Bey recorded an audio message from custody. His voice carried exhaustion and disbelief. He hadn't lied about anything. The world passport represented his belief in global citizenship, his rejection of borders that divided humanity into artificial categories. He'd used it before without problems. Now, South African authorities were treating him like a criminal, threatening to deport his entire family, placing him under state supervision for reasons that made no sense. The message ended with an announcement nobody expected. He was retiring from music and film, effective immediately. One final album would release later that year. Then he was done with the entertainment industry as it currently existed. The retirement wasn't just about South Africa. It was about every border he'd encountered, every gatekeeper who'd tried to control him, every system designed to keep artists dependent. The arrest was just the final confirmation that nowhere was safe, not even Exile. The trouble actually began 2 years earlier, in 2014, when Yasiin Bey tried to return to the United States for a tour. He'd been living between countries for a while, moving through Central America and Europe, searching for somewhere that felt less suffocating than Hollywood. The tour was supposed to be a homecoming, a chance to reconnect with American audiences who'd supported him since the Black Star days. He never made it past immigration. Border officials pulled him aside at entry. There were problems with his paperwork, they said, legal issues that needed resolving, immigration concerns that hadn't been addressed. Nobody would give him specifics, just vague references to complications and procedures. His tour got canceled. Promoters scrambled to issue refunds. Venues that had sold out weeks in advance went dark on the scheduled dates. Bey was stuck outside his own country with no clear explanation why.
There's a certain level of fear that that the system needs to keep inside of people to keep them participating in a certain type of way.
The denial felt deliberate. His activism had been escalating for years. The 2013 Guantanamo force-feeding video had outraged government officials. His public statements about American foreign policy, police brutality, and systemic racism weren't winning him friends in federal agencies. When immigration suddenly had problems with his entry, the timing seemed too perfect to be coincidence. They couldn't arrest him for speech, so they used bureaucracy as punishment. That's when he started seriously looking at South Africa. The country had history with political exiles. During apartheid, artists fled there, seeking refuge from oppression elsewhere. Post-apartheid South Africa seemed progressive, welcoming. Somewhere an artist could exist without constant surveillance and control. He moved his family there in late 2013, enrolled his children in Cape Town schools, tried to build something resembling a normal life.
I got quite a bit of work done there. But the bottom line is that I was no threat.
For a while, it worked. He performed at local venues without industry pressure. He worked on music without label interference. He lived as Yasiin instead of constantly performing as Mos Def. But the visitor's permit that allowed him to stay there wasn't permanent. Extensions required justification. South African officials wanted to know why this American artist was really there, what he was running from, how long he planned to stay. The questions had no good answers, at least none that fit on immigration forms. And when his permit expired and extensions got denied, that's when he made the decision that would trap him completely. The World Service Authority had been issuing world passports since 1954. The organization believed national borders were artificial constructs that divided humanity unnecessarily. Their passport represented global citizenship, the idea that every human had the right to travel freely regardless of where they were born. Some smaller countries recognized it, most didn't. South Africa absolutely didn't. But Yasiin Bey believed in what it represented more than he believed in the nation-state system that had caused so much suffering throughout history. He'd been using the world passport for travel between certain countries where officials either recognized it or looked the other way. The document became his statement of resistance against borders he considered illegitimate. When his South African visitor's permit expired and officials denied extensions, he decided the world passport was his way out. He'd entered South Africa as an American citizen, but he'd leave as a global citizen answering to no single nation's authority. The plan collapsed the moment he presented the document at Cape Town International Airport in January 2016. Border officials didn't see philosophy. They saw fraud. Someone trying to circumvent immigration law with a fake passport. The arrest happened fast.
A foreigner may only depart from the Republic upon presentation of a valid passport, and that a world passport is not a valid passport in terms of the Immigration Act.
Bey tried explaining what the document represented, why it was legitimate, how other countries had accepted it. South African Home Affairs didn't care about precedent or philosophy. They cared about someone they believed was trying to deceive them. The detention made international headlines within hours. Major news outlets covered it. Hip-hop blogs exploded with speculation. Some supporters defended his use of the world passport as principled resistance to unjust border systems. Critics called it entitled celebrity behavior, an American artist thinking rules didn't apply to him. Neither side fully understood what was happening. This wasn't about paperwork. It was about an artist who'd spent years running from systems of control, only to discover those systems extended everywhere. South African officials gave Bey and his family 14 days to leave the country. But leaving was just the beginning of the punishment. They placed him on their undesirable persons list, a designation that barred him from re-entering South Africa for 5 years.
Smith, who has been in the country for over a year, has now been branded an undesirable person and is unlikely to ever be allowed back in the country.
The ban wasn't bureaucratic procedure. It was retaliation for challenging their authority, for suggesting their borders weren't legitimate, for being difficult when they expected compliance. The country that was supposed to be his refuge had declared him permanently unwelcome. By mid-2016, Yasiin Bey was discovering what it meant to be truly stateless. South Africa had banned him for 5 years. The United States had denied him entry back in 2014 for reasons still unexplained. European tour dates started collapsing as he struggled to secure travel documents any country would accept. Concert promoters in London waited for confirmation that never came. Berlin venues gave up after weeks of uncertainty. Amsterdam shows got canceled before tickets even went on sale. The man who'd rejected national borders was learning exactly how powerful those borders were when governments decided to enforce them. But the border troubles didn't start the exile. They finished it. The real push began years earlier, back when Yasiin Bey was still performing as Mos Def and Hollywood was deciding he was too dangerous to employ. The breaking point came in 2013 with a video that would make him unemployable in mainstream entertainment. He strapped himself into a chair and let medical professionals force a feeding tube down his throat while cameras captured every second.
My name is Yasiin Bey, and I'm here today to demonstrate the standard operating procedure for force-feeding detainees at Guantanamo Bay.
The Guantanamo force-feeding video went viral immediately. Human rights organizations had been reporting on the practice for years, describing how hunger-striking detainees were subjected to the procedure twice daily. The UN called it torture. Medical professionals called it cruel. But reports didn't change policy. Americans read the words and moved on. Bey believed they needed to see it, to watch someone's body convulse as the tube went deeper, to hear the gagging and choking, to understand the violence being done in their name. The backlash was immediate and total. Critics accused him of exploiting detainee suffering for publicity. Others said he was trivializing real torture by turning it into performance art. Government officials condemned it as anti-American propaganda. Liberal allies who'd supported his music quietly distanced themselves. The industry didn't need to officially blacklist him. The video did their work for them. Major film roles stopped coming after 2013. The blacklist was invisible but absolute. But before the Guantanamo video, there'd been the 2006 MTV Video Music Awards incident. Bey had set up outside with a megaphone, performing his Hurricane Katrina response song without permission, while celebrities walked red carpets inside.
See that Katrina clap? Listen, homie, it's dollar day.
Police arrested him for disorderly conduct mid-performance. The industry called it a publicity stunt, evidence of instability, career desperation. The whisper campaign that he was difficult to work with started that night and never stopped. By the time the force-feeding video dropped 7 years later, Hollywood had already decided Yasiin Bey was someone they needed to eliminate from their ecosystem. The video just gave them the excuse they'd been waiting for. The problems went deeper than individual controversies. The real issue started in 1999, when Yasiin Bey first realized the industry was treating Mos Def as intellectual property instead of a human being. His debut album, Black on Both Sides, had succeeded beyond expectations.
All over the world, hearts pound with the rhythm. Fear not of men because men must die.
Critics loved it. Fans bought it. The underground hip-hop community celebrated him as conscious rap's new voice. But in label offices and management meetings, something disturbing was happening. They'd stopped calling him Yasiin. Everything was Mos Def this, Mos Def that. The stage name was becoming its own entity, separate from the person who'd created it. Label executives wanted Mos Def at events Yasiin had no interest in attending. They wanted Mos Def to endorse products Yasiin didn't believe in. They wanted Mos Def to smile and perform and be grateful, while Yasiin was trying to make art that mattered beyond quarterly earnings reports. His collaboration with Talib Kweli as Black Star made the problem worse. The duo got celebrated as authentic voices who'd never sell out, as artists with integrity in an industry built on compromise.
We get it every time. You got me on?
That reputation became its own cage. Every creative choice got scrutinized for political correctness. Every collaboration got questioned for authenticity. The pressure to be perfectly conscious, perfectly political, perfectly uncompromising at all times was crushing. By the mid-2000s, Bey was living a split existence. Mos Def was the public figure who showed up for interviews and performances. Yasiin was the private person his friends and family knew. The distance between them kept growing until Yasiin felt like he was disappearing inside the brand. In 2011, he finally made it official, publicly announcing he was going by Yasiin Bey from then on. But contracts still said Mos Def. Marketing materials still said Mos Def. The industry had turned his stage name into property they controlled, and changing what he called himself didn't change who owned the brand. That's when he started planning his exit. Not just from Hollywood, but from America entirely. He needed distance from the machinery that had consumed Mos Def and was now coming for Yasiin too. The industry wanted performing monkeys who'd dance on command. Every artist who refused became a target for systematic destruction. Dave Chappelle had fled to South Africa in 2005 for the same reason.
And that's what it is. What this city really needs, without irony, I'll say this, the cure for LA is in South Africa.
Cat Williams had sacrificed opportunities rather than compromise. Monique had been blacklisted for demanding fair pay. The pattern was clear. Resist the machine. Lose access to everything the machine controls. Bey knew what was coming. He just didn't know how far they'd take it. From South African detention in early 2016, Yasiin Bey announced his final album. December 99th was scheduled for release on December 9th, exclusively through Tidal. 3 singles dropped before the full album: Local Time, Gnaw, and Seaside Panic Room. Fans waited for the complete project. The release date arrived and passed. Nothing appeared on Tidal. No explanation followed. The retirement album vanished before anyone could hear it, which felt perfectly appropriate for an artist who'd spent years disappearing from the industry that made him famous. But December 99th wasn't the only missing project. Bey had mentioned 2 other completed albums: Negus in Natural Person and the long-awaited Black Star follow-up with Talib Kweli.
From the first to the last of it, delivery is passionate, the whole and not the half.
His collaborator Ferrari Shepherd confirmed both albums were finished, recorded, and mixed, just sitting unreleased somewhere. Fans had been waiting for new Black Star material since 1998. Learning a completed album existed but wouldn't be released felt deliberately cruel. Though cruelty wasn't the point. Control was. The decision to withhold completed music made sense once you understood Bey's war with streaming services. These platforms paid artists fractions of pennies per stream while keeping the majority of subscription revenue. The system enriched tech companies and labels while leaving musicians struggling. Bey saw streaming as the final evolution of industry exploitation, a system that turned art into data and artists into content providers with no leverage and minimal compensation. In 2019, he finally unveiled Negus at a listening session in Hong Kong.
As Bey touched on life, death, and time, in the center of the exhibit was a huge moral tribute to the late Nipsey Hussle, where he was immortalized in paint and beautiful tapestry. Respect.
The album had been recorded in London back in 2015, held unreleased for 4 years. Press statements announced it would unfold as a series of installations around the world. Physical events in different cities where attendees could hear it once. The album would never be available digitally or physically for purchase. Fans who wanted to experience it had to travel to wherever the next listening session happened. The decision baffled industry observers who understood streaming dominated modern music consumption. But Bey wasn't trying to succeed by industry metrics. He was trying to opt out of the industry entirely. If the only way to avoid exploitation was refusing distribution through exploitative channels, he'd choose that over compromise. The retirement wasn't about stopping creative work. It was about refusing to participate in systems designed to extract maximum value from artists while giving them minimum control. His music still existed. It just existed on his terms now, accessible only to people willing to engage on those terms. The industry called it career suicide. Bey called it survival. In 2025, Yasiin Bey returned to music with Forensics, created alongside producer The Alchemist. 9 years after announcing his retirement from a South African jail cell, 8 years after his supposedly final performance, he was back. The project blended personal reflection with political commentary, proving an artist who'd never stopped observing even during years of forced silence. The retirement had never been about quitting music. It had been about quitting the industry. The return happened without traditional promotion or streaming platform dominance. Bey hadn't suddenly embraced the commercial systems he'd rejected. Forensics existed on his terms, distributed through channels he controlled or approved. The scattered guest appearances during his retirement years made sense now. Work with Kanye and Kid Cudi on Kids See Ghosts, collaboration with Black Thought, features with Freddie Gibbs and Madlib. He'd been active the entire time, just invisible to industry machinery that measured success through chart positions and streaming numbers. His mother, Sharon Smith, had died in 2023, 2 years before the Forensics release. She'd managed parts of his career, guided major decisions, taught him the values that made compromise impossible. Her death had forced Bey to confront whether the costs of integrity had been worth it. 51 years old, banned from countries, estranged from an industry that once celebrated him, sitting with grief so deep it made all those battles feel small. But looking back at the path, he understood something his mother had always known. Survival didn't require surrender. The younger artists watching his return were learning that walking away from bad deals was possible. You could challenge exploitation. You could build a career outside traditional industry structures. The path was harder, the audience smaller, the financial rewards uncertain. But the alternative was becoming a product instead of a person, which was what the industry had wanted from Mos Def back in 1999 when this whole exile began. At 51, Yasiin Bey represented something increasingly rare in modern entertainment, an artist who'd survived by refusing to compromise. He'd lost money, opportunities, visa status, and mainstream relevance, but he'd kept his creative vision intact, his principles uncompromised, his identity his own. The industry had turned his stage name into a brand. Governments had turned him into an exile. None of it had broken him because the part that mattered most had never been for sale. Anyway, that's it for the video, folks. Bye.